We're continuing our study of some of the background considerations for the life of Paul. And if you remember, we had said that the world of Paul's day was comprised predominantly of three elements: the elements and influence of the Greek culture, the influence of the Roman culture, and the influence of Judaism. We have seen how the Greek culture came into Palestine in Paul's world through Alexander, bringing culture and bringing the Greek language. We've seen how Rome has risen to power and now has come into Palestine itself at the invitation of the Jews. I do not think the Jews in 63 BC knew what awaited them when they invited Rome in. But Rome came in, and we left off on the notes at point number 7. I would like for us just to look at some of the other points as we go through: the power of Rome, the cruelty of Rome, the Greco-Roman culture, and the benefits to Christianity. Under the power of Rome, if you will just put number 1, this was the primary aspect of the Roman culture, was its power. Its power. Secondly, if you'll put down that this power could be seen in its armies, the power could be seen in its commerce, the powers could be seen in the cities and in the buildings that Rome established wherever it went. The power of Rome, certainly it was to be feared. At the same time, as we said earlier, it gave peace to a world, stability to a world that God was preparing for the gospel. How about number C, the cruelty of Rome? Under this, if you will just note that the generals, the Roman generals that conquered the world of Paul's day were very cruel. It might be interesting to you to note that Pontius Pilate, the one who crucified Jesus, was later removed by the Roman Senate because of his cruelty. He was so cruel. He would murder Galileans, he would murder Jews, and the Roman Senate finally removed him because he was so cruel. And so on your handouts here, if you would just put that the Roman generals that conquered the known world and the world of Paul's day were known for their cruelty. Point number 2, men were put to death for any offense against Roman law. Any offense against Roman law, death penalty could await them. And so Rome was a cruel ruler. Even though they gave peace, Rome was very cruel. On your handout sheet, number D, the Greco-Roman culture. And so if you'll just put under number D that the world of Paul's day thus became a mixture between the Greek culture and Roman power. We said earlier that the Greek culture conquered Rome, and it did. And the world of Paul's day, look what you've got. You've got a mixture now. You've got people in Paul's day who will speak the Greek language, follow the Greek philosophies and poetries, but at the same time submit to Roman rule and power. What were the benefits to Christianity? Specifically, what were the benefits of Roman rule to Paul? If you would put down under number E, number 1, Paul was a Roman citizen. He was a Roman citizen. Point number 2, let me give you some scriptures. And what I'd like for you to do is to write down these scriptures and leave a space out to the side. And what we'll do is then summarize how Paul's Roman citizenship helped in his ministry of the gospel. If you would put down Acts 16, 37 through 39. If you would put down Acts 22, 25. And if you would put down Acts 25, 10 through 12. And Acts 27, 1. In Acts 16, 37 through 39, if you'll just say Paul's Roman citizenship saved him from imprisonment in Macedonia. Acts 22:25, he's saved from a Jewish mob. And he's saved also from scourging because of his Roman citizenship. In Acts 25, 10 through 12, because of his Roman citizenship, he's going to get to go to Rome. He appeals to Rome. Any Roman citizen could do that. You mean that God would use Paul's imprisonment to get the gospel all the way to Rome? That's right. That's right. And it was because of his Roman citizenship he could appeal to Caesar, and he did that, Acts 25, 10 through 12. And then Acts 27:1, again, his Roman citizenship aided him in his progress to Rome. So the Roman culture, God would use the Roman culture. Isn't it amazing that just like an artist can pick up some paint brushes and begin to paint on a canvas and get what he wants, the effect that he wants? Our God is so mighty and so wonderful that he uses entire nations and continents. He moves a mighty Roman army, allows them to go across the world and conquer a world so that Paul can take the gospel in peace from border to border, and then will allow Paul, who is a Roman citizen after he's converted, to go to Rome and preach the gospel itself, even into the very palaces of Rome. That's the Roman influence. Look at number 3. The last element setting the stage for Paul's ministry was the Jewish element. Notice here, number A, we have dispersions. What I'd like for you to do is to put down these dates regarding the dispersions. Out beside Assyria, if you will put down 722 B.C. Out beside Babylon, if you will put 586 B.C. And out beside Antiochus III, if you will put 195 B.C. You say, why are these dates important? Let me go over them again. Assyria, 722. Babylon, 586. Antiochus III, 195 B.C. This is why they're important. Because on those dates, hostile armies came into Palestine, forcing the Jews to flee throughout the world. Literally fled throughout the world. You might just want to put down that in 722, Assyria came and dispersed the 10 northern tribes of Israel, and they went all over the known world. In 586, Babylon came, and you've got that right there printed on your notes. Babylon came, destroyed the Jewish temple, and took Jews all over the known world. A second major dispersion. And then in 195, Antiochus III came, and of course we talked about his son. Under him and his son, the gospel would, or not the gospel, but the Jews were spread all over the known world once again. 3 dispersions. And what happened when a Jew would leave Palestine and go? He would build, look at your handout sheet, number B, he would build synagogues. Synagogues. And as we said before, the synagogues were a place to learn the scriptures. They were a place for Jewish worship. The main thing I want you to put here under number B is they were throughout the world. Once again, we mentioned that earlier, but get it down again because it's that important. Secondly, if you would put under number B, they would become launching pads, or they would become centers from which the gospel would radiate, would go out. And you'll find also, and why don't we put that down here under number B also, that when Paul would begin his ministry, whenever he would go into a city, you know where he went first? He'd search out the synagogue. He would search out the synagogue. Look at number C, the relationship of the Jews to the native peoples. The Jews were looked down upon by the Gentile world because they were separatists. They would not join in very much with the religious culture of their day. They were separatists, and so you might want to put that down, that they were separatists. And then number 2, the same time, it almost seems opposite, at the same time that they were separatists, they still had their doors open to anyone who wanted to worship their God. Anyone who wanted to worship their God, even if you were a Gentile, to come, submit, and join with them. So people knew this. People knew this 100 years before Paul was ever born, that at the synagogue was an open door. And whatever preaching was going on in that open door, you could go and listen to it. So now let me just summarize. The three key elements: Greek culture, Roman culture, and the Jewish culture. Greek culture gave the language, gave the philosophy and the things of the age to get people to think in terms of their relationship to the gods, even though it was wrong. Point number two, the Roman culture gave power and peace and rule, civil peace, road systems where people could travel. And then number three, the Jewish culture gave synagogues, launching pads all over the known world. God, you see, was getting ready planet Earth for his gospel. Jesus would come and die on a cross for your sins and my sins and for the sins of the whole world. And Jesus did come to seek and to save those who were lost. Jesus said that in Luke 19:10. But you see, Jesus, when he went back to heaven, left the charge to man to take the gospel. And that's why, going back to Acts 1:8, when he gathered that little band and he told them, you'll be witnesses to me in Judea and Samaria and to the uttermost parts of the earth, they did not know that one named Saul would one day be leading the forefront, going throughout the known world. But he would. And he would do it because and with the help of the elements that we have laid out for you here. Because you see, Paul would speak the Greek language. He, because he was a Roman citizen, would appeal to Roman citizenship, even to getting to Rome so he could preach the gospel. And everywhere he went into the Jewish synagogues, because he knew he would find Jews to preach to, Gentile converts, and also God-fearers. Look at the next part of our study. Your handout sheet that is marked the religious environment, the notes. What we've tried to give you is the political and the social scene. Let's talk a little bit about the religious scene, the religious world of Paul's day. I think that will help you to understand maybe some of the things that he wrote in his epistles later on as you study them. Point number C on your handout begins with number 1, the religions of Greece and Rome. What were the religions of Greece and Rome? I mean, if you lived in Paul's day and you were walking down the street in Paul's day and you bumped into a Gentile, what religion would he have? If you were a disciple and following Paul along on his missionary journeys and stopped in Palestine and in Asia and over in Macedonia, what type of beliefs would people have? Well, let's take a sampling here. The basic character of the Greek and Roman religion was this: that they had a fantastic mythology, fantastic myths. Their religion was bound up in myths, and they had over 1,000 different objects of worship. Please put that down. You see, those who followed the Greek and the Roman religions had over 1,000 different objects of worship. Here's something that was different, though. Some of the gods that they worshiped, and this is still under number A, some of the gods that they worshiped were contradictory to one another. I mean, one god would be a god in the pursuit of virtue, and another god they would worship would be in the pursuit of pleasure. You see. 1,000 objects of worship. Can you imagine having to gain fulfillment in your own personal life by trying to worship all these different deities, and every one of them has a different characteristic and a different character? Oh, listen, that should make you really appreciate the Lord Jesus Christ and the God of this Bible, you see. And Paul was going into a world where people looked out upon God as different pictures, and they needed a clear voice. Paul would bring that to them, because our Bible pictures only one God revealed in 3 persons, and none of those 3 persons contradict the other. They all form a beautiful unity and a beautiful whole. God the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. But the character, again, look at your notes, number A, the character of the religions of Greece and Rome, that they were fantastic myths. There were over 1,000 different objects of worship, gods and goddesses. But the key thing is they contradicted one another. How are you going to find truth with gods differing from one another? What was the nature of their gods? If you would just put out beside this, their gods were often the mirror images of man. Many times, their gods, and if you'll put this down here, also engaged in sin and vice even themselves. And doesn't that stand to reason? That if man is going to invent his own religion, his gods are going to be just like him? And in the Greek religions and the Roman religions that were in Paul's day, the gods were mirror images of man. They also were involved in sin and vice, all of that. Look at number C, the limitations in worship. The Greek and Roman religions had no hymns of praise, no psalms of praise, only poems. Can you imagine? Can you imagine what it would be like to go to a church service and not have any hymn? Can you imagine what it would be like to come and gather among believers and not have any of the blessed hymns of the faith? And our entire book of Psalms is hymn after hymn after hymn of praise to the one true God. Well, the religions of Paul's day that gripped the hearts of the Greeks and the Romans, they had no hymns of praise. Their religion was an empty shell, and I wish you would put that down. Not only did they not have hymns of praise, but their religion was an empty shell. It did not satisfy. And that brings us to point number D on your handout, is that among the people there was a superficial allegiance to their religion. In other words, their commitment was shallow. They may have believed and thought about the gods of Rome and Greece, but there was no heart commitment. Why? Who were they going to commit themselves to when they had over 1,000 gods and goddesses? They had the pantheon there. Pantheon devoted to the many gods. Some of the gods differed with one another. And amidst this horrible situation, the gospel is going to break forth as a beaming light amidst the dark sea. That was the religious environment, the religions of Greece and Rome. What about number 2, the mystery religions? The mystery religions. What were their basic character, the mystery religions? If you'll just note that these, under definition or designation there, number 1 on your handout, designation, these were secret cults which flourished in the Greek world several centuries before and after the time of Christ. I'll say that again so you can get it down. These were secret cults, secret religious cults that flourished several centuries before and after the time of Christ. What was their basic appeal? Well, you see, the mystery religions appealed to the need for a personal religious experience and for a sense of future salvation. Put that down and then let me ramble here just a moment. The mystery religions appealed to a personal religious experience and the promise of future salvation. You might also want to put down that they were popular during Paul's day, the mystery religions. Do we have cults today? Those of you who are listening to this lecture and following along, do you have cults in your own country? Sure you do. Those of you here, do you have cults here? Sure you do. And we can name some cults. Well, back in Paul's day, you had cults. And some of them were the mystery religions. And since the Roman religion and the Greek religion were just an empty shell, people were going around hungry for something real. And they wanted a personal experience. And the mystery religions promised them a mysterious, mystical, personal experience. What was their origin? That's the next point on your handout. If you'll just put these were from the east, their origin was from the east. When we say the east, we're speaking of from Palestine, east of Palestine, the east. They grew up, these mystery religions grew up in areas that practiced fertility rites or agricultural rites. By that we mean that groups of people would worship maybe the seasons, the sun, and they would create their own gods for this. And as they worshiped these fertility rites and things, they created their own god and had their own secret rites. And you might also put here they had secret initiation rites, and the emphasis was on emotion. The emphasis was on emotion, secretness, initiation rites, having your own personal God and relationship. What about their influence? If you'll put primarily that they grew up, the mystery religions grew up in the eastern part of the Roman Empire. The mystery religions grew up in the eastern part of the Roman Empire. And they were popular even among the Roman soldiers. And you know, Paul will counter some of these mystery religions. Lord permitting, we'll get into that later. But right now, if you'll just note here that under the influence, they grew up in the eastern part of the Roman Empire and even affected the Roman soldiers. What are some representative types of the mystery religions? Well, you've got some listed here. Let's take a quick sampling. You've got Dionysus, Magna Mater, Syria, Mithraism. You're sitting there thinking, what in the world are all these different things? I don't care that you know them in depth, but again, we're just trying to give a survey of the background, the world that Paul lived in, the world that he walked in, the religions that he would confront. Dionysus was a mystery religion. You might want to just put here that it elevated Dionysus, the god of wine. The god of wine. Those of this mystery cult said that through their studies you could gain the ultimate release of the soul. And doesn't that sound, it sounds good. The ultimate release of the soul. What is that? The ultimate release of the soul. My goodness. You know, but they could peddle it on the streets of Rome. They could peddle it on the streets of Ephesus. They could peddle it in Antioch and Jerusalem. And they could peddle it to people who would buy it because they didn't like the Greek and the Roman religions. They were an empty shell. So here comes somebody along saying, follow us. We worship Dionysus, the god of wine. Through our secret rites, you gain the release of the soul. I do want you to note that they had specific doctrines. And they urged consistency of life. They had little rules to live by. But notice what they're promising people. Again, mystery, religion, an experience, emotion, ultimate release of the soul. What about number 2, the Magna Mater here? If you'll just note here that the Phrygians worshipped this goddess. And if you'll just put Phrygian as Phrygians, the Phrygians, and Paul's going to minister into this region, the Phrygians worshiped Magna Mater. And did you know that they had a doctrine called being born again? This mystery religion promised people that they could be born again. Now let me just ramble a minute. Do you know how you were born again under Magna Mater? If you were a devotee, a new convert to this mystery religion, you would stand under a wooden platform. And across the platform, they would bring a bull. And they would stand a bull above you. And after you had prayed and done according to their rites, you would look up, they would slay the bull above you, and as the blood dripped down through the planks, you would open your mouth, and I know this is terribly gross, but you would open your mouth and you would see the blood, and they said that's how you receive the life force and you were born again. How far? How far from the truth? How far from the joyous gospel that we have and that Paul would carry? Being born again by the grace of Jesus Christ. Oh, what a contrast. What a contrast. The blood of a bull falling into your mouth. Not being born again. No, no. That only comes through faith in Jesus Christ. Look at number 3 on your handout, the D, Syria. All I want you to put down out beside that is the fertility cult. That's all. It's just a fertility cult. Number 4, Mithraism. Mithraism. And I do want you to know a little bit about this. If you put that this mystery cult was popular among the Roman soldiers. This mystery cult was popular among the Roman soldiers of Paul's day. It promised immortality. It taught the triumph of good over evil. And this mystery cult had 7 stages. 7 stages. That if you were a convert to this mystery religion, you went through 7 stages of progress or discipline, and each step was a higher plane to God. Now you think of what Paul would later write when he says that there's only one intermediary between God and man. Between God and man. One intermediary. The mystery religions were promising ultimate release of the soul, being born again, progressing gradually up toward God. My goodness. That was the world that Paul would minister to. The mystery religions. Looking back over these, I do want you to note the designation that their appeal was to emotion, their origin was peace, their influence was strong during Paul's day. And out of the ones that we've named here, I do want you to note Magna Mater and their born-again terminology and what it meant, and also Mithraism, that it was popular among the Roman soldiers because of its discipline and emphasis there. What were some of the common deficiencies in the mystery religions and those of Greece and Rome? What I'd like to do, and we'll do this on the next tape, is to make a contrast between what they offered and what the gospel offered. And we're almost coming to the close of our background considerations, but that's important. What did the religion of Greece and Rome offer? What did the religion of the mystery religions offer compared to our gospel? And it's going to make you appreciate your own salvation and the gospel that we have and preach.